We're almost there.
No worries.
Do we have audio or is it? It's HDMI. Oh.
Ashley, how are you? How are you? It's Becca Williams.
Hi, good to see you.
I think I figured. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Can she hear me? No?
I can hear
good.
you. Yeah.
I think I figured out. It was the Women's Visionary Congress.
Oh,
You think?
okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was there the last year, so that was probably
Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. But it seems like we run in a lot of different circles. So, hi.
Yeah, good to see your face.
How's it going, Ashley?
Good. Good. Yeah, just got back from Mexico.
Got back from what?
Mexico.
Oh,
A few hours ago.
Had a retreat this weekend?
Crossroads. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. How are things going there?
Good. There's been some staff changes, but I'm still working there and still once a month, so it's good. Yeah. We've been pushing a bunch of things recently. It's good.
So yeah, we should be ready to go here pretty soon.
Okay.
Let me just plug this in again. I'm not sure why we're not hearing the audio.
I love that. It was great.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Hey, can you talk?
Yeah.
Say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Yeah, definitely getting an echo, which is going to be a little distracting. Oh, wait. Now it sounds okay. Okay.
Is it better now?
Yeah, I think, yeah, no, I'm not hearing an echo anymore. Okay, good, because that would be really distracting.
Thanks for stepping in.
Sure.
I'm gonna go upstairs.
All right. Do you want to introduce yourself, or should I introduce you, or what?
I can introduce myself.
All right, you probably know yourself better than me.
I do know myself pretty well. Well, should I start, or you guys need to do something first, or should I jump in?
Ready?
Ready? Okay, cool. Well, hi everyone. I'm Ashley. I live in Los Angeles, and yeah, I thought I'd kind of start in on, since this talk is about being a psychedelic ambassador, which is what I've been doing for the last 2 years. I thought I'd kind of go over how I got to the place I'm at and what are the projects that I'm doing now, and then kind of jump into some of what I think is really important to be an effective psychedelic ambassador. And then we can kind of open it up to questions, because I've been doing this for a long time, and so I have a lot of knowledge about a very wide variety of different things. So even if it's not necessarily something related to what you guys, what I talk about, you could ask all sorts of things if you want, and I'll do my best to point you in the right direction. So yeah, I got on this path. Well, I started doing psychedelics about 10 years ago when I went to Burning Man, which really shifted my perspective in a lot of different ways, both because of the community aspect of Burning Man and because of doing psychedelics for the first time. And then about 4 years ago, I did ayahuasca and 5-MeO-DMT for the first time. And 5-MeO-DMT specifically really shifted, that's like a big understatement, but completely shattered my entire paradigm. And it took me a good 1.5 years to recalibrate myself and kind of build up my new view of what reality is. And then, but part of what came through that was also that this sort of like, oh my God, people should have the opportunity to try this if they want to, and it's safe for them, obviously. And so it really activated me in becoming more passionate about spreading accurate information about these things. And at the time, I was working as an oceanographer. I worked as an oceanographer for 9 years until I quit my job about 1.5 years ago. And part of what catalyzed that shift, even though being an oceanographer is really rad, it was really about one of the things that came through that experience was if we're not really going to save the environment or save the animals or save the oceans until we heal people. And one of the things that I see as such an important aspect of psychedelia or psychedelics in general and psychedelic medicines is their ability to catalyze very rapid change and growth. So, which has now gotten me in a completely 180 career shift. I luckily didn't do that in the first year because I've definitely seen a lot of people that have a huge experience and then they're like, I got to change my job and have a divorce. And usually good to wait at least a month. If it's still true in a month, then or if it's true then and it's true in a month, then you can wait. But yeah, so it took me about 3 years after that Fedemio experience to really see how that shift could be plausible in my life, and so started the Aware Project about 2.5 years ago, mostly because I was wanting to see, where. I mean, I had access to a lot of the psychedelic community through Burning Man, but a lot of those people were kind of taking psychedelics, but they weren't really learning or educating themselves about it, and I guess kind of geeking out on it in a way. And so I wanted to learn more about these things and dive deeper, basically. And I wanted to see if there were groups in the area. So I started looking for psychedelic societies. I started looking for bicycle day events because there's a bicycle day in San Francisco that's pretty big. And I was like, well, why isn't there one in LA? And at the time, I was dating someone that was an event producer. And so I'd been learning a lot of event production through him. And so I decided to run through my own bicycle day event. And then we started these psychedelic awareness salons leading up to the event to kind of build some steam up. And then from there moving, and then after bicycle day, we just kept going with the monthly events. And now we do them 2 to 3 times a month, 2 in Los Angeles typically, and 1 in San Diego. And now I've got a couple other people that are looking to start Aware Project like events either in Monterey and possibly Santa Barbara. So yeah, it's kind of taken on a life of its own in a way. But I think as far as, being a psychedelic ambassador, having the science background that I do has been a really helpful lens to be able to look through this stuff, because I don't know if you guys have the same situation out in Denver as we do in LA, but there's a really big new age and alternative health community out here, and for me it was really challenging for a little while to accept something beyond this reality, but then not really knowing where the line was. Like I've been doing yoga since I was 17, but I've never experienced my chakras. Do I believe in them? Other people talk about them, but I don't know. I've never really had a direct experience, or at least maybe not in a way that I've known what it was. And so where does the line get drawn? And I think that as people that are walking this, exploring within the psychedelic realms, it's really important to be able to still have a way to communicate and about what we were experiencing back to kind of mainstream society, because we don't want to go through a situation again where we're the counterculture, because that's not creating unity, that's creating separation. And so I think the better model that I think we're really embodying as a community more now is being something more like scouts. Like we're going out to the edges of consciousness and to the edges of health and spirituality, and then gathering what we see as beneficial and bringing it back and sharing that with the wider population. And, you know, I think that pathway is getting more and more well worn, mostly because of, you know, a greater acceptance of things like meditation and kind of Eastern philosophy and spiritual practices, as well as cannabis having such huge strides in only, you know, is really a slow build, but then very rapid change very quickly. And so I think it's a really important time to be able to be really good communicators about these things, because people's minds are still starting to open up a little bit more, but at the same time, because of the just the madness of the world right now, and how it's very hard to know what is a fact, and through whose lens are you getting these facts, it becomes much more important, I mean, as a citizen, but also as someone in this community, to be able to point to concrete things to be able to back up what we're saying about the benefits of these things. And so really learning about the science that's going on right now in the different ways that psychedelics have been able to be used. And I can go over some of those things. I'm sure you guys are pretty aware of some of them. I'm not sure how long you guys have been meeting now, but I don't want to, or maybe before I get into that, we can have like a little bit of a back and forth on what you guys know about some of the current science, and then maybe I can kind of fill in some of the holes, because I don't want to. I've had speakers at my events sometimes, and they get too remedial, because it's like most of the attendees that we have been geeking out about this stuff for a long time, and so they're not. If you're starting out at a really basic level, people are just like, this is boring. I don't want to do that. So I see being a psychedelic ambassador having two really important parts. Is one is knowing the science and being able to speak that language, and then also speak and being able to communicate from your heart and your emotional body, because having the science addresses people's cognitive mind. You know, does this stuff make you go crazy? Does it, you know, the kind of standard rhetoric fears. Being able to have a few really good papers to kind of show some of the things. There's a really great paper in that came out in Nature a few years ago that was a meta-analysis of psychedelics, showing that psychedelics do not in fact cause psychosis, and that people that do psychedelics actually have a lower rate of psychosis than the general population. And so, I mean, that could say something about the people that are seeking these things out, or it could say something about the psychedelics themselves, and I don't think that's quite been teased out yet. But having papers like that in really reputable journals to be able to show people, I think is really important. And you know, having gatherings like this where you guys can talk about some of the scientific studies that are going on, and be able to point to things like the MAP study for PTSD, which I do know a decent amount about that. So if you guys want to ask me questions later, you can ask more about that. And be able to, you know, point to some of this stuff getting into more mainstream media, because, you know, like the Michael Pollan article that was in the New Yorker, and things that have been in the New York Times recently, there's just been some really big journals. And word on the street is right now that Michael Pollan is actually writing a book about this stuff. He knows a couple of researchers quite well that are working on this stuff in the Bay Area, and so it looks like his next book will be about this, and that will be a great introduction for people, because he's such a respected name and author. So having that scientific kind of and clinical perspective to be able to start to talk to people, I think is really important. The way that I kind of came out of the psychedelic closet to my parents was starting to talk about MAPS, and saying, at the time, my boyfriend, who was the event producer, was saying, working with MAPS to see if we could host one of their events. And so I just was like, okay, well, this is a great to be able to talk about this. And I started saying, well, you know, we're thinking about having this event. with this group called the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they've been studying these things, and then so I told them about that, and then I was like, so have you guys done psychedelics ever? And they're like, oh, no. And I was like, well, I have. And then started kind of telling them about some of the benefits that I've gotten from my experiences. But based off of, part of being a good ambassador for any type of controversial cause, it's really about listening. Because I've been vegetarian and vegan for about 10 years. And so that's yet another thing that has that same sort of charge for people when you talk about it. They think that you're trying to convert them, or and they tend to get kind of defensive because it's really rocking their paradigm, and some deep, held beliefs. And so I think part of my skill set in talking to people about controversial things came out of being a vegetarian and vegan, which was more, getting back to it, was more about listening and seeing where people were at, and we're asking people questions about what their perspectives on being a vegetarian or vegan was, or what that meant to them, or what their preconceived notions about it was. And so I think in the same way you can ask people similar sorts of things when it comes to psychedelics, and you can use things like, oh, did you see that interesting article that came out in the New York Times or something recently about the psychedelic research, and ask people what they think about it, and just gauge in conversation. And I mean, another aspect I want to bring in here too is the difference between being sort of an ambassador, the way I call it here, and being, someone that's an evangelist. Because I know that a lot of us that, maybe you have a really big experience and you really want to tell a whole bunch of people, which is beautiful that you want to share that, but taking a few moments to be mindful about how you're communicating those things will be really, will be a payoff in the way that will land. And the way we've sort of structured this with the Aware Project is not that we want to encourage everyone to do psychedelics, or that it's a panacea, but what we focus on, our main value, is curiosity, which is something that kind of is shared between the psychedelic community and the scientific community. And so that's sort of my background, which is, how do we be more curious, the fact, and how do we kind of start to think about our consciousness and the way that we go about living in a way that's a little bit more, have a different kind of perspective. Like the fact that we all dream every night and have these hallucinations, it's totally weird. It's very weird. And yet it's normal. And so, and the fact that we have these different states of consciousness already, sleep or dreaming or waking consciousness or flow states, or meditation states, it's not just the standard narrative that we in the West are really used to. And so being able to talk to people about some of these kind of more philosophical kind of conversations, I think, just engages people in something bigger than themselves, which is what psychedelics do in the first place. It makes you think of something from a different perspective. So, encouraging curiosity when it comes to science, like why should certain things be off limits to research? Because as a scientist myself, that's like the worst crime that can be committed, is to be able to essentially, like you're burning books before they're even written. You're not even allowing the process of thought to be able to go through and to be able to write the books. You're stopping thought and you're controlling thought by, and I don't know if you guys have talked much about cognitive liberty, but that's another aspect of this, and sort of the, and it's something that our culture has also thought of, had a lot of concerns with for a long time, which is, how much sovereignty do I have over my own body, and conversations about, abortion, and what can I put in my own body to affect my own consciousness when it has nothing to do and I don't affect anyone else outside of myself. It's really about sovereignty. And with this sort of slippery slope of our freedoms going down, and us just sort of expecting that we don't really have a lot of privacy anymore, I think it's we need to be really vigilant about what freedoms are really something that we need to encourage, or something to hold fast on as an inalienable right. So there's several ways to kind of start these conversations with people, but starting it from more of a place of like engaging in an honest conversation about curiosity, and using science as a way to start the conversation, and to say that, hey, there's something out there beyond what we've been sort of told in terms of the war on drugs rhetoric, or everyone that just the burnt out hippie type of thing. And then to get to my second aspect of being a really good psychedelic ambassador is to be able to also tap into that part of yourself that is the part that's been affected by psychedelics. So climate change is a really great example. Like you can talk to someone that doesn't really believe in climate change and give them facts till you're blue in the face, but until you engage something that's a little bit more engages an emotional body response, and speak from possibly a space that's a deeper, more authentic place, let's see, if this is isn't this something we should be looking into, because of the repercussions on humanity, if it is true, shouldn't that be something that we should be looking into? And in the same way with psychedelics, when I talk to people about my own experiences, I really try and take a moment and really drop into that part of me that's been profoundly affected by these experiences, and talk about my experience from that place and not from my words in my head. So I think it really, because, what is it? Maya Angelou says, people won't necessarily remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So if you're, acting like a sane, skeptical, yet open-minded, curious person, and talking about how things have affected you and how you maybe feel more connected, or more grounded, or more inspired, more productive, whatever it is, speaking from that place, because people feel that. And that's something that I think as we get a little bit more in touch with the other parts of our body other than our head, we start to see the impact of what that can be on us. So, yeah, and I mean, the other kind of aspects that I've talked about too for people is, looking, I mean, the world is getting even more crazy and more compressed in this pressure cooker right now. And so it's becoming easier to talk about alternatives, because it's so clear that the existing system is not working. And so, I think the argument of saying, okay, we need more tools in the toolbox to be able to solve the global problems that we're facing right now. So, I mean, Albert Einstein says, problems cannot be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And so we're needing to step out and look at different perspectives. And so having this be, once you can kind of maybe open people's minds enough to see that it's not something that's psychologically as dangerous as they may have been told that it was, and that it could be a possible new tool. So, but, on top of all this is just kind of being a little bit more bold about talking to the people in your life that maybe don't know that you do psychedelics, and engaging in the conversation. And I know that that can be, a challenging step to take, but I think in my mind, it's just starting the conversation on a person-to-person level, because and showing them that there are other ways to view the world, and but yeah, it's tricky to walk that line between being an ambassador and evangelist. So I wanted to, so that's kind of my main spiel that I wanted to go over right now. I have a couple notes from another talk I gave recently, so I'm going to just skim through here and see if I have anything else to say regarding those things. All right. Yeah, so I'd maybe like to see if you guys if you have any questions so far, and then to maybe open it up a little bit to discuss what aspects of the, you know, psychedelic science literature you guys know about, anything you have questions about, and maybe, you know, we can kind of talk about that a little bit. Maybe we can popcorn just different studies that people have known about, and maybe show of hands, like who knows a lot about that, and maybe if there's something that people don't know a lot of, I can kind of fill it in a little bit. I don't have, you know, I'm not a researcher in this stuff, but I have been around it a lot, and I do have a science background, so I can at least kind of maybe give a little bit of a brief overview. And then I am going to be involved in the MAPS MDMA trial for PTSD, so I do know a lot about that, which is going to be starting in the fall. So yeah, any questions so far?
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Let's see. One is science.
Who's talking?
Oh,
sorry, I can't use
This is
you.
Becca.
Oh, hi, Becca.
Can you see me? Yes. Okay.
No, maybe if you tip it just a little bit that way.
There.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great. Thanks.
Let's see. So the first question is regard to studies, and you know, there's been a few things thrown around with THC. Okay, so cannabis, vis-a-vis people who could be catalyzed by THC for a psychotic break, and I'm wondering what you know about that.
I don't know a ton about THC. I mean, well, I probably know more than most people, but still.
Those are who are predisposed, yeah.
Pardon?
Those
As
are
far as I know, yeah, I think it's more the predisposed part. You know, it's the same as with psychedelics, that if you are predisposed to having a psychedelic or psychotic break, then it can just catalyze it earlier. So that was why there's certain recommendations that people don't do psychedelics if there's a family history of psychosis until after you're 25, because most things that are that have something related to that will show up before 25. So like schizophrenia and stuff.
I see. Okay. And
but yeah, that paper in Nature, which if you look on the Aware Project site under resources, and then I think news, there's a bunch of news articles in there that are like the top picks that I have that are good to kind of share around, and then one of them is that Nature article.
terrific. And then the other thing, of course, this is kind of hard to differentiate. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
But if you talk about the use of psychedelics, and so there's psycho-spiritual and aesthetics. The argument could be that aesthetics are psycho-spiritual. But I'm wondering if you have in your own mind kind of differentiated the subgroups of people who are actually taking psychedelics.
Yeah. Well, subgroups are taking some. Well, let me address the sort of like maybe types of use first, because I think Rick Doblin had a really great way of phrasing this. So there's sort of the therapeutic use, through maybe more of a clinical model, and then there's sort of a psycho-spiritual or more of a spiritual use, and then what he calls, instead of calling it recreational use, he calls it celebratory use, which I love. I think that's a really great way of putting it. And that's maybe a healthier form of recreational use, but and it definitely there's overlap with a sort of a psycho-spiritual aspect. But being able to have use that is you know, and eventually that's what we're all working towards, is to be able to have celebratory use be just as justifiable as spiritual use or therapeutic use, but to be able to be in a headspace where you're reminded of the oneness and the beauty that's in the world, and to be able to just dance and connect with people. I mean, that's where you're truly living, you know, to be able to learn how to culture that in yourself. So I really liked that way of phrasing it. And then as far as different types of people that use it, I mean, there's the people that are doing like microdosing, and it's more for like performance type stuff. And I just watched the talk by Daniel McQueen, who is from Medicinal Mindfulness. He gave a talk, I guess, a couple months ago, and he broke it out into this 4 different parts, where it was like therapeutic. Well, I'm trying to remember now all the 4 that he used, but I'm going to try and maybe my own influence on it, but there's the therapeutic healing aspect, there's a spiritual use, celebratory use, and then this like performance part. So microdosing kind of falls into that aspect. Oh, and then I think he had creativity too. So I think, you know, in talking to people about these things, being able to talk about these different uses, and you know, microdosing is also becoming way more of a hot topic. And, you know, because it's a lot less intimidating for people. They're like, oh, well, I'm not actually going to trip out. It's something else. And so it's kind of a gateway drug for people to have a, you know, to be getting a little bit more curious about this stuff. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about the American shaman tradition in the United States? And how can we make sure that the dispersed groups that are already practicing can communicate better to people that are trying to enter the tradition and strengthen?
So from the actual Native community and versus people that are wanting to come in?
No, just from a practical standpoint, for people that aren't really concerned about necessarily the following like the Psychological Association for studies or for treatments, for just going out and actually trying to help people and learn how to do that responsibly in a shamanistic type tradition, but making sure that that's a uniquely American thing that we take from the lessons and the traditions that are already being practiced here, and not necessarily taking from Brazilian or Peruvian traditions.
Right. And are you talking about Native American as well, or more like modern Western American?
Sure. I mean, like really taking from whatever sources we can, but that's what I'm talking about, making it uniquely American, and that we are one of the biggest melting pots on the planet.
Right.
So we should take that as what the American shamanism looks like. We're willing to take from all traditions and create a new practice.
Right.
So how can we start that? Or if it's already been started, how do we strengthen it and communicate it better to people who are entering that tradition?
Right. Yeah, it's a super complex issue. There was at the Women's Visionary Congress last year, there was some conversations, and one of the interesting, I'll kind of expand out on what you're saying here and get to a couple different points, which is, you know, well, one, you know, the cultural appropriation aspect, you know, and so, I mean, there was a woman that came and spoke at the Women's Visionary Congress about encouraging people to use the medicines that are local to their area. So for us, you know, mushrooms would probably be one of those things. And then, I mean, the synthetics, I guess, sort of fall into kind of a no man's land. But at the same time, you know, LSD is kind of our sacrament of our like modern culture, because it doesn't have a tradition, but obviously has some very powerful psychedelic effects. And, you know, Timothy Leary's books and a lot of, if you look into the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, the people that used to make Orange Sunshine LSD, they really had a spiritual connection to LSD, and they used Timothy Leary's book, Psychedelic Prayers book, which was obviously influenced by a lot of Eastern spiritual traditions, you know. And so sorry, I'm kind of like bouncing around a little bit here because I'm thinking of different things, but you know, still addressing this kind of concept of cultural appropriation, you know.
I'm not concerned with that. I'm concerned with medicines that are practical and are going to help people. I don't really give a shit about what people think about stealing from other cultures. You can respect another culture and take the lessons from them into your own without abusing their culture. I'm not talking about abusing or taking from anybody or stealing. I'm talking about paying homage to them and using stuff that's going to heal. People are sick in this country. I don't think we should rely on such a weak concept as cultural appropriation to disabuse people of medicines that could heal them. Well, I agree.
Right.
Actually.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Yeah. You know, and if we start to think about it, you know, I'll get more into it, but one of the things is like, you know, we're a global species. Maybe if we start to think of ourselves as a global species, because we're all on this planet together, you know, then, and these are maybe more of a birthright to humans, and thinking about it less that way and making sure that, so.
Would you tell a heroin addict from America that they can't partake in an ibogaine treatment or an iboga treatment because they're not African?
Right. I mean, I don't know of too many people that are arguing that. I mean, there are a few. But the thing is that, yes, you're right. The U.S. is a huge melting pot. And the thing is that religions and spiritual traditions and healing traditions are constantly changing and morphing and taking on new things. You know, we're just doing it at a faster rate now because there's more information flow. And so I think that, but to be able to do this in a way that's really effective, I think we need to make sure that we're actually learning what is the traditions that have been honed for thousands of years. Because if we go and just take a few of those things, we're maybe not getting the whole story. And so being able to immerse ourselves and be able to be humble and learn those different things and then be able to bring them back to kind of our own people.
That's what I'm talking about how to responsibly take it back into our
someone else speak besides you? I'm deeply concerned with like what just happened, the way that you instructed her. And
Can you speak a little louder? It's hard for me to hear.
stereotype people.
You hear that?
No, I still can't hear.
Okay, first of all, don't tell me how to speak. You don't know where I'm coming from, and you don't know who I am. So don't speak to me like I'm a child.
Sorry, there's a argument breaking out here.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe let's direct it back to asking her questions as opposed to arguing amongst ourselves.
That's fine.
Does that sound cool?
That's absolutely great.
Okay. Well, thanks. Do you have a question for her?
Yeah, I have a question, I guess, about cultural appropriation. You might want to speak up also. I don't think she can hear that.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I guess part
Yeah, it's just a real soft.
What's concerning to me about psychedelic medicines is that they they lower the barriers between people in ways that are profound and uplifting and inspiring, but can also be incredibly risky, right? When there is cultural differences that have as deep a history as medicines themselves, histories that can make certain folks feel uncomfortable if they are in a culturally different environment that they've grown up with. And so how should people try to manage the fact that the use of these medicines is incredibly emotionally vulnerable in a cultural fashion, maybe more so than simply thinking about the ways in which, oh, I can hear your thoughts, that freaks me out, but being kind of sort of intentional about being careful in the way in which those medicines, again, increase vulnerability that otherwise would not be evident or manifest in a polite civil society.
Okay, hold on, I'm trying to piece together all that. Well, I mean, so I'm kind of thinking of like a couple of different examples that might, so, if you have like a white American going down to the jungle and doing it with a tribe or whatever, I mean, that's not their environment that they grew up in. And so whether they feel comfortable or not there, but I mean, the underlying kind of conversation in all of this, is that there's a certain amount of white privilege is a very consistent theme at this point in psychedelic in the West. I mean, there are plenty of other cultures all over the world that use these things, but in the conversation it's happening in the U.S. right now, it's predominantly white people that are more privileged because we're not persecuted as much for doing illegal things, and then just various sociopolitical situations where drugs were introduced into certain populations to target them and all sorts of things. So Natalie Ginsburg from MAPS wrote a really good article about psychedelics and white privilege in Symposia recently, which I thought was a really good topic of conversation. And what she kind of came down to was that we need to have a conversation to just keep that in mind as we're moving through this, moving along this path together, because we're all in it together, and just being open to listen and to create what is best for people. And what was interesting is I had an African-American ayahuasca practitioner as a speaker about 9 months ago or something. And one of the things that he was saying was that, we're kind of like predominantly white in our community. How do we, how can we support you in your desire to spread this to, people that look like you as opposed to look like us, and what he was saying was that it was more like us kind of supporting the people on the front lines of that, but that each individual group, whether you're, going and talking to your Roman Catholic family, or talking to, another, whatever your background is, you need to be the ambassador to what you feel like is your community. Because if it's coming from someone that doesn't look like you, it's going to be a little bit harder to relate to. And so, but, as, going back to the other person's question, how do we create this new American shamanism? I think that as long as we can still keep coming back together and starting to continue to ask questions and be able to be curious together and see what works. We're in this phase of, okay, even if these shamanic traditions that have worked for thousands of years in cultures in South America, the thing is that we don't live in a jungle. The symbol of a jaguar is going to have a different meaning for me than it is to someone in the jungle. It's probably going to make me think more of a car than it is going to make me think of like an animal, unfortunately. But so, this is the Wild West. We're starting to take new things, and especially since there are new entheogens that are coming available that have never had any shamanic context, LSD, 2CB, 5-MeO DMT, smoked, DMT, as opposed to ayahuasca. It's all new, there's no cultural context. So we're trying to kind of, okay, do these old traditions work for this completely modern human that doesn't live in the jungle anymore? Or do these kind of Eastern traditions work a little bit, lend some kind of lens? But if we can kind of think about it through the lens of like, hey, we're all figuring this out together. Let's keep doing this together, and let's continue to communicate as we go along. Because if we're not doing the work individually on how to communicate with people that are different from us, and doing that work, because it is work, it's a lot of work to be able to step back and see where our traumas are, where our past is, what are our generational traumas. This is the work. We're cleaning up the karma of generations on all sorts of sides. Whether you think of karma through the kind of metaphysical sense or more from the, epigenetic effect of trauma over generations. So engaging in that conversation and talking about us all being on the same team and starting to pool different things and just experimenting together, I think that's part of what could be a beautiful contribution that the American culture could bring forth, because it is the melting pot. How do we take all these things and then make it into something new that works for a unique problem that is coming up right now?
Well, doing it, totally
Yeah,
doing
thank
it
you.
underground. Well, it's all underground too.
Right.
On top of that.
So that's my question, actually. In Los Angeles, what's happening above ground, if anything?
So the few things that are happening above ground is that we'll be starting the MAPS phase 3 trial for MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. We have the MDMA assisted psychotherapy for social anxiety for people on the autism scale. That one's finishing up pretty soon, and that's going through UCLA with Charlie Grobe and Alicia Danforth. And then we have the only legal ayahuasca church. It's the Santo Daime Church in the LA area as well. So as far as legal things, that's what we have. But, you know, there are things like, this is maybe less on a shamanic sense, but like there's also ketamine clinics, you know, and ketamine therapy, which definitely can get very psychedelic at heavier, you know, doses. And then with the legalization of cannabis and what Daniel McQueen's doing with medical mindfulness and encouraging people to do cannabis healing, that's something that we can be using right now as well, that is legal and could be a really good building block. You know, if we start with something like cannabis and help people through using that as a therapeutic tool and starting to get in a relationship with a plant, then going to the next step with, you know, using mushrooms and ayahuasca and these things that don't have a legal avenue at the moment, but as they start to become available, especially through therapeutic models with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and psilocybin-assisted therapy, then, you know, it's a slow step process. And yeah, I mean, as sort of the underground kind of scouts that a lot of us are, we're kind of figuring out this, and you know, if we can find ways where we can pool that information that we're learning through our own, you know, and places like Arrowwood, you know, are kind of pooling some of that information, but maybe not in as a coherent way as it could be, you know, and synthesizing it a bit more rather than having just sort of individual trip reports. You know, maybe it's about starting this as a new conversation, because, you know, there's a lot of conferences, you know, I've been to several psychedelic kind of more sciencey conferences, but, you know, I had someone that was like, oh, we want to do another conference. And it was like, okay, well, yes. And there are a lot of conferences that have gone on. How is this one going to add something new to the mix? How are we maybe focusing it more on action items? You know, what do we want to do collectively as a community, either to get the word out more or to figure out how to get more money for research, or like, let's be more goal oriented rather than, and having the community participate, not just the scientists that are doing the work, but as the community, how do we participate? And, you know, maybe having a conference on, you know, what is, you know, let's create a new psychedelic shaman, you know, American shamanism, and what does that look like, and how do we start to engage that conversation? So, you know, as a community that, you know, we may not be able to do open work right now, but we can definitely talk about it openly. And so I think that's a great conversation that we all can, you know, start to have as a community.
And what kind of things are happening below ground, like ayahuasca ceremonies, mushroom therapy? What are the underground things happening?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of ayahuasca, San Pedro ceremonies, 5-MeO, facilitators, not too many on that front, but a few. You know, underground therapy with MDMA and psilocybin. I mean, those are the things that are more kind of facilitated, as opposed to people's, you know, own individual or facilitated therapeutic context. Because I mean, the other big movement in this same arena is the festival community, because the festival and EDM, festivals and then EDM scene is just gotten exponentially bigger, and the psychedelic use and non-ordinary states of consciousness, whether you're using psychedelics or something else, is something that continues to grow. And so I think as this younger generation that's had all these experiences starts to grow up a little bit, and then maybe starts to have enough experiences now that they're starting to see that it has a more deeper, profound effect on them, and start to kind of get into maybe in the space that we're all at right now, which is getting more actively curious and about it, rather than maybe just using it in a kind of recreational perspective. But all these people are going to be growing up and then becoming, many of them are going to becoming activists just as we all are. So I think that we're going to see a big shift due to that as well.
So can I ask another question about politics, but just more about the legitimacy issue? Because that's interesting is when I think about like what has worked, in this case is medical marijuana, because I mean, this medical marijuana in states is conservative as Illinois, right? So one of the things that's been so effective is that they were able to bring kids and parents of sick kids before state legislatures. They were able to tell these really compelling stories about kids with epilepsy, right, and other seizure conditions that the cannabinoid oil would help them with, right? And I've been thinking, what could sort of psychedelics, what connection to sort of primary stories and sympathies could these substances connect with, right? So I've been thinking, of course, about PTSD in veterans, right? And the way in which the image of a grieving mom whose PTSD son committed suicide, for example, would be a pretty compelling story before a state legislature. So is there work that's being done that you know of that attempts to create connections with people who in the community that might resonate with the broader society? If EDM, raves and such, and even ceremonies on the ground are still kind of in group, right? So in terms of outreach, have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that is being done right now is more in group, and that's something that I've definitely thought a lot about, as how do we get outside the bubble, right? And obviously, choosing PTSD as the tip of the wedge with MDMA therapy was not. It was strategic, obviously, because MDMA has this connection to something that's a little bit more, it is a right-wing issue. And so, but as far as, I mean, the thing is that the people that are doing this work kind of fall into different categories as well, because there's not like a psychedelic think tank that's figuring out ways to market this in a broader sense. These are either people like research institutions like MAPS or Hefter that are doing research. I mean, they have PR people, but like this is a small nonprofit, and so one of the things that I think that groups like ours, like the Aware Project and other psychedelic societies can do is like, how do we as groups be those think tanks to be able to get this word out? So I've had some ideas with our group of how do we start to get the conversation into a broader audience. Social media works to a certain extent, but the thing is that social media has its own bubbles that it's really hard to get out of your own bubble, even in social media. And so how are, like things that are more like kind of the old fashioned stuff, like parades or like protests, where you're getting outside of your bubble, and then having connections in the news media to be able to highlight what it is that you're talking about or celebrating or whatever, to be able to get it out to different audiences, I think is a really good way to start conversation and start to, because all these little things, just giving, it's more little news articles that come out, and more people are just going to start, maybe they see a headline here and they read a little something here, and it just becomes like, wow, this is something that's being talked about a lot. So, I mean, I think I would encourage you all as a community, if you can come up with a community project that is a way to bring, especially the science, because it is still really the best conversation starter. And since, you guys have people that are doing an MDMA trial, for phase 3 trial in Denver, or no, they're in Boulder, but like in the Colorado area and Fort Collins, highlighting that study is going on and that they're going to be needing to do recruitment soon, or just sparking the conversation in a broader way to highlight the research is being done, just to spark conversation, but, making sure that you have good community conversation about what is a responsible way to do that, because and how do you make sure that you're, again, not proselytizing, that what the facts are, that you're not saying that this stuff is a panacea, but that we should just be curious about this stuff. This is where we can actually, there's enough of us now that are part of these psychedelic communities, that how do we harness the talents of all of these different people to be able to take the next step from learning about these things, connecting as a community, to actually moving into action and contributing to something bigger.
How do we, if somebody is interested in that study, do you know any information on how to get people
in the study?
up, or? Yep.
Yeah, so right now they're not allowed to keep lists. Well, you can keep, you can keep an informal list, or at least is what we're doing. Is if people are interested in recruitment, they can, but there can't be like a hierarchy list. So basically, people have already been contacting people who know us and who are part of the team, and so we're just putting them on a list that when recruitment starts, we're just going to send them an email that says, hey, recruitment starts, this is how you apply, but doesn't give preferential treatment for anything. But MAPS will be posting about when recruitment starts, like officially, probably in like late August, early September. But they're going to be kind of the official, hey, recruitment has started, and then you can point people to like something that shows what the criteria are to be able to be considered for the study.
Do you think you could get the Psychedelic Club of Denver on that list, on the email list?
Well, you guys can sign up for them. I mean, it's just the MAPS mailing list.
Okay.
It's just their main mailing list, and then you just be getting a lot of emails from Brad Birch, and then you got to sort through them all. That's from my. So, but luckily, I'm like, I already know where all this stuff is happening anyway. So, but.
I had one other kind of big question. So you're talking a little bit about the difference between being like an evangelist. I don't know how to say that word.
Evangelical.
Yeah, or an ambassador. And I guess I'm not really as concerned about being perceived as like evangelicus or
evangelical.
Like especially having those like difficult conversations. Do you know anybody that does that really well right now? That could be kind of like a model, or?
Well, I mean, the first person that comes to mind, and he's not necessarily a normal person, but Jason Silva. I don't know if you've seen any of his little short talks. He talks about psychedelics on a really pretty regular basis. He's very eloquent and is just, talking about why, what's like, let's start talking about this stuff. This is, let's be curious, because I think it is important that you don't come off as especially saying that this is a panacea, because then you, knowing what the risks are and knowing what the science is and what this can help and what it can't help is really important. But you know, showing enthusiasm, I think, is great.
Yeah, I just have like a really conservative family, so like, you know, just the fact that I'm even involved with this is like, whoa, what's Tyler doing?
Right.
Sort of thing. And like, I guess it's kind of a follow-up question to that is, you know, like the whitewashed psychedelic community is definitely something that like I'm interested in kind of exploring and trying to build those networks to, you know, the indigenous cultures or even like the minority groups that, you know,
Right.
we're afraid. How do we like encourage those difficult, like the really difficult conversations, just like
Yeah.
the difficult experiences.
Well, I think, you know, using things not necessarily psychedelics are a really great way to start that conversation. Like I worked with a woman that's African American, and she's really like wants to bring, you know, psychedelics to her community more. And so I was suggesting to her, like, before you kind of jump all the way into that, because a point that I thought was really important that, you know, again, me coming from a different community didn't think of, but being someone that uses psychedelics maybe a little bit more openly in a African American community where you have a lot more people that have been targeted by law enforcement and then maybe have been forced into an informant place, that you may be more likely to get ratted out than you are in a community that has not been targeted as much by the police. So, I mean, that's sort of, I think it's a little bit harder to be a psychedelic ambassador if you're in a community that's been targeted like that. So I was telling her is that bringing holotropic breath work into communities that to introduce people to non-ordinary states of consciousness, I think is a really good tool because it's just breath. And there are either holotropic breath workers all over the country, and you know, they're probably predominantly white too, but at least it's something that's a little bit more accessible. And then because cannabis is coming, having more options, I think cannabis healing and encouraging that as like a healing modality, you know, and starting to engage in conversations about cannabis, I think is going to also be a really great conversation starter before kind of getting into other things. And then, you know, as people get more interested in it and become more in this ambassador role, then you know, they can kind of you know, depending on what community that they feel that they're aligned with, you know, then they can be the ambassador for their particular community.
And I guess speaking of communities, besides just being whitewashed, it's a very male-dominated field as well. Especially
depends on where you're looking, because I mean, I think when you look online and you look at the psychonaut community, yeah, it's predominantly male. But when you look at the harm reduction and therapeutic community, it's very balanced, and if not more females. So it just depends on what perspective, which kind of subgroup within the community you are looking at. So
you say more celebratory users, or
sorry, say it again.
You said the psychonaut communities kind of.
Psychonaut. No, I would say that the celebratory festival kind of and use is pretty equal too. But I mean, psychonauts being the people that are like, I want to try the weird drug and I want to try a lot of it just to see what happens. And those tend to be the people that are like online finding out recipes for you know, and in chat spaces and wanting to know about different things. Tends to be more males. And I think maybe it's people that I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that could be, but so I mean, I think it just depends on which perspective you're looking at it from.
Cool. Thanks.
So I don't. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, do you have any suggestions for, so I know you've co-founded Interspace Integration, and
Right.
LA is a much larger market than Denver, but do you have like outreach strategies that you use to get people interested in these kind of resources? And educating people about the importance of these tools as far as like the psychedelic experience and the psychedelic path goes?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the feeder for Inner Space is the Aware Project. So having the Psychedelic Society as sort of the like feeder, which having, you know, a meetup group. I don't know if you guys are a meetup group, but meetup is a really great way that we get people from like outside of the community, because normally it's like Facebook and then you're inviting your friends or your friends of friends, but you're still in this group. But meetup really exposes people that wherever you're, but then being able to have, you know, integration circles on a regular basis. And I don't know, maybe it could be tacked onto your meeting, like come an hour early and we're going to do just an integration circle, you know, peer-based kind of like, let's just talk about stuff kind of thing as a community. And if you've got other therapists, which it sounds like you might have a few therapists in the mix, that could, you know, be a bit of a more professional support if that's needed, or could help, you know, facilitate those meetings, and have that be the first part of the meeting. And then the second part is much more of an educational or advocacy kind of space. You know, it's the same people you're going to be targeting to come to psychedelic societies are the same people that are probably going to be interested in, it's anyone who does psychedelics. So you just like finding people who do psychedelics. So, I mean, if you have any local festivals or burner parties in the area, maybe asking if you can go and set up a booth and talk about what you guys are doing as a club and why you think it's important, and saying, hey, we're also doing these integration circles for people that are, you know, maybe going through an ayahuasca experience. If you have local ayahuasca groups, talking to facilitators and saying, hey, you may have like, or maybe you've sat with people that come through town every once in a while, but they're not like locally based. Say, hey, can we help work with you to provide an integration space for your community, you know? And because obviously either there's too many people for you to necessarily help integrate, or you're not here all the time. And then, you know, another thing is that like a lot of ayahuasca communities, like if you have to pay money to do ayahuasca to participate in the community, it kind of sucks, because if you're like, well, I'm not really feeling called to do the medicine work right now, but I really want to be part of the community. Like, and so I have some local groups that are trying to do more non-medicine meetings and gatherings, so that it's more like, hey, let's all come together and watch a movie or have an integration circle or play music together, you know, without the medicine. You know, seeing, you know, who finding the people that are doing any kind of, you know, psychedelics, and then who are the people that are doing medicine work in your area, and asking them if they want to, you know, if their community wants to participate in something larger. Is that helpful? But it's tricky, you know, getting the word out is tricky. You know, I've done a certain amount of Facebook email or Facebook advertising, and trying to target people that are like into the Joe Rogan show and into these things that are kind of that cross between mainstream culture and psychedelics, you know, or other types of podcasts that where they've been pro psychedelics in a certain sense. So
Have you found
there's kind of sneaky things about the Facebook marketing has not, I don't think, has worked all that well, because the thing is that the way traditional Facebook marketing works is you want to make a catchy post that then someone wants to repost it on their own page. And if someone's not out of the psychedelic closet, they're not going to repost it. And they're not going to invite people to their event, to an event that they're going to. They may not even say that they're going to an event, because they're afraid that it'll show up on their page and be a detriment to their job or whatever. And so the ways that you advertise just is like, it's a completely different it's a completely different lay of the land than most advertising, unfortunately. So I've stopped using that as much. I do have someone that wants to be a little bit, to get more strategic about trying to use Facebook marketing. But I don't, you know, in terms of like, you know, I've maybe got like 1 or 2 people per event that comes in, you know, after I've spent like $60 on Facebook advertising, and I'm like, well, that really wasn't like an effective use of my money per se. So, but I mean, you know, where are you guys using psychedelics? Where are the people that you do them with? Where are they hanging out? Who are the people that they're talking to? So, you know, and I think it's, when I first started the Aware Project, the primary people that I was marketing or like sharing it with were people in the Burning Man community, because that was my community. And I was like, oh yeah, people are going to be so into coming to this, da, da, da. And I'm like inviting all the people for the Burning Man community, and like from the Burning Man community comes. And what's really interesting was because they're all doing this stuff, but they already have community. So they're not, you know, they already have people to talk to about this stuff, and they may be more into using it rather than geeking out on it. So I think it takes a particular type of person that wants to get like either geek out on it or get activisty about it. Sorry?
Is that Facebook is really not a great place to advertise. It's extremely temporal because everything just moves right down the bottom of the page. There's no static content, and it's really a bad place to organize groups. And people are just hung up on it. You act like cattle, and Facebook's the thing. No, it's not right. It doesn't really work very well for a lot of people. And that's just my comment. You need a static web page where people who go, the content is there, they can find it. It's not like zooming off into infinity.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you guys don't have a website, if you guys don't have a website, I think having a website is definitely a good, at least placeholder, so people can easily find you. But that takes more of a person actively searching, hey, I want to find a psychedelic society in Denver, and then you'll pop up. But if you're trying to be something that's a little more proactive, that like, hey, someone might be using psychedelics, but they didn't know that there were more people around them that are doing this stuff, you know, so, but I mean, part of what I think that's important, you know, as I talk to people in the psychedelic or in the Burning Man community about this stuff, is like taking that next step from using them to learning about them, because it took me probably about good 6 or 7 years of using them to actually be like, hey, wait, what is this stuff doing actually? To then moving into a space of like, hey, wait a second, this has actually had a really profound effect on my life, and I'm interested in sharing that. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, but the thing is that I think the growth is happening. It's just maybe not happening as fast as we want it to, but the fact that like more and more psychedelic societies are popping up all over the place, and encouraging, if you have friends in other cities that don't have a psychedelic society, starting something up, so that we can get more people in more cities. And then, you know, when we do want to create like a big, protest, we have people all over in different cities to be able to like activate. I don't know, you know, so I think, you know, as the psychedelic community does get bigger, we are wondering, how do we all stay connected and coordinated, so we're not just these disparate groups. But I know, at least for myself, I'm so busy that like it's hard for me to keep track of what everybody else is doing. You know, some of the people part of the a new group called Mind Manifest Midwest, which one of the guys from that's been helping out with the Third Wave website, I don't know if you guys know about that. They're wanting to start a new campaign, social media campaign called Find the Others, which is to specifically encourage people to find their local psychedelic community. So I think that's a really great, because there was another one that came out about a year ago called Psychedelic Because, that was supposed to be like, why I'm into psychedelics, and using that hashtag. But I think this one's even better, because it's like actually getting you connected to real people on the ground, encouraging people to start to participate in the community. So yeah. I don't know how we're doing on time, so I don't want to like keep you guys longer than. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy that you guys are doing a gathering and communicating, and I really encourage you to figure out ways how, as a community, you can work together to make something that gets the word outside of the bubble, and using a little bit of time to be able to do that. So.
All right, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great night. All right, nice to see you all. Okay, bye. Thanks, Harry. Talk to you later. Bye.